why investing today is a must do if you want to have any kind of decent life, any kind of life with quality and not just struggling to make ends meet month to month. And I will prove that to you with numbers. And these are the numbers that actually woke me up some years ago, 5, 6 years ago, when I started my investing journey, and made me realize that I really need to start as early as possible. And also, if I don't do that, I will be left behind. On the other hand, if you invest on the right assets, you can not only have a decent life, but you have also an opportunity to have financial freedom and do whatever you want in your life after a period of time. And I will show you now that in more detail. First of all, what you really need to understand is that the system is actually stealing from you. Now, in the past, if you think about our parents, they could work, both of them, and manage to have a decent life, to have a house, to have a car, and be okay without really any loans, not being rich, but having a decent life. Now, fast forward to today, both of them need to work and still cannot make ends meet. Today's the generation of millennials and even younger than millennials, it's almost impossible to buy a house unless you get into deep debt. You buy a very big loan, which you will need to pay until almost you die. So you become a slave with a huge risk on top as well. Because imagine that you have a loan where you need to pay monthly. You have monthly payments of 1,500. Imagine that you lose your job. Okay, how are you gonna make these payments? Even if you lose your job for 6 months or 1 year, then your house is going to be taken from you, basically. So you have a very high risk. What you can see here is the inflation rate for the last 25 years, both in US and China. You don't need to have a PhD in statistics to see that it's going higher, much higher, and with an average of 6.46% a year in US and 10% in 10.6% in China. This is just to show you the averages globally. And if you go to countries with weaker economies, unfortunately the inflation is much higher. But what is more important here to see, very important, is that the inflation rates follows almost exactly the M2 money supply. The M2 money supply is basically how much money are being printed and circulating in the system. Let me put it like that. So the inflation follows almost exactly the M2 money supply, and it's not what the politicians tell you is because of, I don't know, because you are lazy or because we have this war, we have the supply chain issues and so on. Yes, this can affect, like you can see in the 2020, we had the blip and actually the inflation went maybe higher than the M2 money supply, and in some other years we had the reverse, but in a matter of in a longer period it will always follow. This is very important to keep for later, that inflation equals almost one-to-one the M2 money supply. Okay, and so far you believe that we had 2% inflation rate every year, because this is what the politicians say. This is usually the best companies which will increase your salary every year based on inflation will give you 1 to 2% because they claim this is the inflation. But in reality, the average the last 25 years it has been 6.5 in the good countries with a strong economy. And the true inflation the last 5 years, it's much higher than that because of what has been happening globally the last 5 years. And you will say now, what about your salary? Your salary has been growing, maybe it meets the inflation. Not really, and you can see now for the last 5 years that the salary is slightly below the inflation. And in reality, the salary is much lower than that, because this inflation that you see here, that plus 20% more or less in the last actually 4 years, from 2021 to 2024, 20% just in 4 years. This is the official data. If you go and check the site trueflation.com, the real inflation is much higher than that, actually. It's closer to 35%, I would say. So 10 to 14% year over year we had the last 5 years. Okay. At the same time, if you look, if you had invested in the S&P 500, you would have beaten by far your wage appreciation, or the salary that you get, the increase of your salary. So already from here you can see that investing is really important to keep you with inflation or a bit above inflation. Okay, if you do just the basic inflation, investing in the S&P 500. Now let's see what is the inflation of buying a house and what is the situation. So basically, in the last 10 years, we average about 8.2% year over year on the housing prices. Okay, this is average in the United States, and actually I show this because there is where we have the best data in US. In Europe, it's a very similar situation. We just don't have as good data to show what is going on. That means that if 10 years ago, as an example, you started putting away money and very aggressively to buy a home that was costing 150,000 10 years ago, and you managed today to have 150,000 in your bank account, and you go to buy that house. Today that house costs 340,000. Okay, so you will never be able to buy that house even if you continue saving, because the house will appreciate much faster than the rate of what you can save money. Okay. Now, this is another example, a very, I would say, telling example, and I show this because the data here were very good and very accurate. You can see from the 1970 until today how basically what is the increase on the salaries. This is the blue line on the bottom, very slight increase. Okay, maybe a couple percent, 1-2% year over year. But then you can see the red line, the pricing of the houses, it went almost parabolic. And then you can also see the money supply, which actually almost matches exactly, except for a few years here and there, the appreciation of the housing. So that tells you that actually the housing, a house doesn't become more expensive because more people want it. It's because more money are printed, and the more money are printed, this causes the money to worth less. And if you are not making more money together with the inflation, then you cannot basically make ends meet. You cannot buy the house, you see everything getting more expensive in the supermarket, and so on. And maybe you don't feel the difference so much in 1 year, but over 5 years, 10 years and 15 years, it becomes very, very obvious, and you cannot make ends meet. Alright, but now let me show you an example which is very, very telling, and this is what got me really into investing, one of the main reasons. Let's say that 5 years ago you had 10,000 euros, you were working already for 5 years, and you managed to put away 10,000 euros and you lock them in a bank account. These 10,000 euros, with the standard interest rate that you get in any bank, basically, which is around 2% per year, these 10,000 euros Today, after 5 years, it would be just above 11,000 euros, specifically 11,040. In reality, though, with the inflation, and I take a very conservative number here of 5% year over year, the last 5 years, we had much more than that, but let's go with that. In reality, you have 8,500 only in purchasing power. You might be seeing 11,000 in your savings account, but you can only buy 8,500 as in 5 years ago. Okay, I hope you realize that, because in reality you don't have more money, you have a bigger number that worths less in value than when you started 5 years ago with this 10,000. Okay, so when you started 5 years ago with 10,000, basically today you can only buy 8,500 worth of goods from 5 years ago. Let's see what happens if you invested that amount in the S&P 500, which is a very standard investment, everyone can do, very easy. Today you would have doubled your money, okay, and already you would have 11.9% year over year appreciation, which actually beats inflation and beats also the real inflation by maybe 1% or so. But in reality, you would have 14,000 in purchasing power from 5 years ago. Still much better, and still you grew your money, which is the very first step. Okay, even though you see 19,800 in your account, the purchasing power is 14,000, you still appreciate by 40% in real terms if you account for inflation as well. But see now what happens if you invest in the winners, okay, which is the Magnificent Seven, the 7 most important companies of the US stock market. Let's say 5 years ago you put 10,000. Today you would have 41,000 in your bank account. In reality, in purchasing power, you would have 33,000 after inflation. Still, you 3x your money in 5 years, which is very, very good. Now, let's see what happens in 10 and 15 years. In 15 years, if you just put, let's say, 10,000 in your bank account, today you would have 13,458, but in reality, you would have lost almost half of your purchasing power because of the 5% inflation rate, so you only have 5,600 in purchasing power. You lost almost half of your money in 15 years with getting a 2% interest on your money in your savings account. This is crazy. In the S&P 500, in the last 15 years, you would have more than 5x your money, and in reality, it would be a bit more than 2x. Okay, more than a double of the money. Now, in the Magnificent Seven, I took on purpose the last 10 years, because if I put 15 years, it would be a crazy amount. Let's say you started investing 10,000 euros, which every person almost in the Western countries can do and can over a few years put aside. You would have 235,000. You could basically maybe buy a house depending where you live today, okay, in 10 years. In reality, it would be 98,000 in purchasing power, but still you did extremely, extremely well. All right. And now let's see what would happen if instead of putting $10,000 directly, let's say you don't have $10,000, you didn't have, or you want to start today and you don't have this amount. You can do very well by just putting 300 euros or dollars, whatever it is, per month. Let's see what happens if you put that money in the S&P 500. Today, after 15 years or 15 years from now, you would have 167,000. All right. And the total contributions would be 54,000. So you have 3x your money. Now, if you did the same in the Magnificent Seven, in the top 7 companies, you would have a bit less than $500,000, all right? You can buy a very nice house with that. Or if you wait a little bit longer, you can become financially free forever. And again, this is with only 54,000 contributions over the 15 years ago. And really, almost anyone in the Western world can put aside 300 euros a month as long as you have a job. All right. Just see the numbers, see what you can achieve, and you can do this. Now, imagine if you are able to combine both, putting 10,000 euros in front and then dollar cost average, putting 300 euros a month. The number would be crazy and you would be a millionaire today, okay, in 15 years. And this graph here shows very well what is the difference between just investing in the S&P 500 without the top 10 companies and what the top 10 companies in the red line did by themselves. They actually, if you had put $100 or euros, whatever, or pounds in 2019 in the S&P today, without the 10 best companies, today you would have around 140, so 40% in a 5-6 year period. But if you had invested in the top 10 companies, today you would have approximately 280, so you would have almost tripled your money. This is so powerful to understand. And if you, together with that, invest as well in digital assets, which is what I do, you would have greatly amplified your gains and you would have achieved even higher returns than investing just in the Magnificent Seven. I personally, the last 5 years, I have averaged 41% year over year, and this is my mission, to help you, to help others out there achieve this as well and become financially free. How I plan to do this? First of all, I can provide a one-to-one guidance, and this is for people who have very little experience and they want to go from 0 to 100 to be fully invested in the right assets in 6 weeks. But you need a minimum of 15K to invest in order for this to make sense. If you don't have much money to invest right now, but you are willing to put the work to learn and get daily updates and so on, then for you the best is the online community, which I'm now in process of setting up. And there you can also help each other grow. I will be sharing daily content. So if that's something that's interesting for you, then subscribe to this channel to get more updates in the next videos, where I will go into deeper detail which are the right assets to invest now for the future that is coming, and also I will provide the link to the community once this is ready. Thank you and have a nice one.